how long does it take to go through the Mandarin Blueprint method? So first, I'd like to create a frame of reference for this because there are estimates about how long it takes to learn a language that are created by the Foreign Service Institute of the United States Department of State. So what I'll put on the screen here is a map of some languages in Europe and Asia and Africa that are considered to be more difficult or less difficult to learn from a native English speaker's perspective. And you'll notice that China is, of course, in the category 5, where they're saying 88 weeks of full-time study, 2,200 hours is what their prediction is to be able to function in the language, be fluent in the language. And of course, the reason for Chinese taking so long is mostly the writing system. And of course, that's the Mandarin Blueprint's strength, is the Mandarin Blueprint method helps you learn the writing system faster than anything that's been around before. So that's your frame, 2,200 hours. And you always want to think of things in terms of hours as opposed to years, right? Because somebody will ask you, for example, I'm a drummer. People will say, how many years have you been playing drums? And well, I started when I was 9 and I'm 32, so I could say 23 years. But it's not really an accurate way of explaining it because it doesn't talk about those many years in my 20s where I wasn't practicing and wasn't improving. So it's more about the hours than it is about the years. And so let's see if we can come up with an estimate of how many hours it takes. And then from there, you can figure out, okay, if I spend X number of hours per day, I'll get through it in, a certain amount of months or years. So the first thing we want to figure out is how many things are there to learn in the Mandarin Blueprint method? Well, if we take a look at this infographic, the current course covers 94% of Chinese by frequency. So at that point, when you're at 94% of the language by frequency, the remaining 6%, you have enough context that you should be able to figure out most of it. Now, I'm not saying there's literally every situation you'll be able to work in fluently. Like I couldn't work fluently in Chinese or in English if I were in the lab of a chemist. Because there'd be too much terminology I don't know. But 94% is enough that everyday life's no problem, and you can actually start to have some interesting conversations about politics or philosophy or things like that. And so that's a decent standard by which to start from. And I'd like to point out that the foundation course covers 80% of the language by frequency, and you can do that in our estimate is about 250 hours. You can finish the foundation course. There's a law of diminishing returns. The most frequent characters come up so much that you can cover 80% of the language by frequency in less time than you can cover the remaining 20%. So the remaining 20% takes a lot more time than the initial 80%. It's that 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. We've talked about that before. So the current course through the intermediate covers 94% of the language. It covers 1,530 individual Chinese characters, hanzi. It covers 4,000 words. There are 5,730 sentences so that you have context for the words and can properly acquire them. There are over 100 longer form stories, which are optional, but they give you a lot more context. They help you acquire the words much faster. When you consider these different things to learn, you want to consider, okay, we need to learn them and we also need to review them. Now, there's a couple things to say about this. So if we take the addition of the sentences, words, characters, and stories, that gives us a total of 12,210 things that need to be learned and reviewed. And now, don't be intimidated by that number because many of these things don't take very long. So it's a question of breaking them down into how long does it take to learn, how long does it take to review. So let's talk about learning first. So we have 1,530 characters. So how long does it take to learn these characters? Well, learning an individual hanzi by the hanzi movie method is faster than was ever possible before because we have a full mnemonic system to learn the pronunciation, the pinyin final and initial, and one of the 5 tones. We have the mnemonic visualization for the character components, and of course the meaning of the character, and we teach you how to, in one movie scene, it's our terminology for how we imagine the mnemonic visualization, in one little movie scene, you can memorize every aspect of a character. Now, at this point, we've had loads of case studies that we've done with many of the clients on the course, and we always ask them, how long does it take you to learn a character? Now, the most common response we get from people is 30 seconds. Nonetheless, though, we want to make sure that we're not giving just the best results. 30 seconds to learn a character is kind of the best you can hope for. Maybe even sometimes it's 15 to 20 seconds to learn a character after you learn the method. But there is a learning curve for understanding how the method works. So we're going to say that it takes 2 minutes to learn each character. And we're not talking about reviewing yet, just to learn each character, 2 minutes, and that takes into account the time that you need to get used to the method, and also just recognizing that sometimes some characters take a little bit longer to learn. So that means that it would take 3,060 minutes, 1530 times 2, to learn 1,530 characters using the Mandarin Blueprint method. So that's our first metric, 3,060 minutes. Now let's talk about the words. Out of the 4,000 words in our curriculum, you only need to learn the first 1,000 individually. So what we do is in the Mandarin Blueprint method foundation course, we give words their own separate flashcards, because you're kind of in a honeymoon period with learning about how Chinese words work, and you need to give them some individual attention. However, when you get to the intermediate course, you can start to learn words right away through context. So you learn a new character, that unlocks, say, 5 words. The way you learn the words in the intermediate course is immediately seeing them in the context of a sentence that is made up of characters and words that you already know. And so what that means essentially is that you don't need to focus as much on words individually in the later parts of the course. So the 1,000 words that are in the foundation course, of those 1,000 words, 400 of them are single character words, which means that learning the character is learning the word. It's the same thing. And so that means there's only 600 words that you need to make an individual flashcard for and learn through our method. So we're going to say it takes 2 minutes to learn those 600 words. So that means 1,200 minutes to learn those 600 words individually, and then the remainder of the words you're going to learn through sentences. So let's talk about the sentences. There are 5,730 sentences, and the thing about a sentence is that you don't actually learn it. It's more just context for learning a word. You see the sentence in the course, and we just tell you, once you understand the message of the sentence, you can move on to the next sentence. And this doesn't take very long, because all characters and words that we put in the sentences, with the exception of a maximum of 1, are characters and words you've already learned. So you're not seeing anything in the sentence that's brand new, except for maybe one word, which we'll call a top-down word. And you can handle that. So the question is, how long does it take you to go from starting to read the sentence to understanding the message? Well, really, in reality, maybe only 15 to 20 seconds. But we're going to make a very liberal estimate and say it takes you 1 minute per sentence to learn. So that brings you to 3,060 minutes to learn characters, 1,200 minutes to learn the words in the foundation course, and then 5,730 minutes to learn the sentences, which in the intermediate course is synonymous with learning the words. We have 850 videos that you need to watch, and while some of the videos are optional, we're just going to assume that you watch all the videos, and that is, of the 850 videos, that's 2,550 minutes of just sitting on your computer or on your phone watching the videos. And then there are 100 stories, which we're going to say 10 minutes per story. Each story, the sentences in the story are not new to you. You've already seen them before. So reading the story itself probably doesn't even take 10 minutes. It takes about 2 minutes to listen to the audio for it, but we're going to say that you go through with a fine-tooth comb, you're reading it meticulously. So 10 minutes per story, 1,000 minutes for the 100 stories. And also the stories are optional, so you could take that out. But altogether, sentences, words, characters, stories, and videos, our learning time is 13,540 minutes. But you can't just learn, you have to review as well. And we review using spaced repetition flashcards. Now, luckily, the spaced repetition software that we use in the course, called Anki, gives statistics to let us know fairly objectively how long it takes to do the different types of cards. Now, we have a number of students on the course who shared their statistics on the Mandarin Blueprint Community Forum and gave us general averages for how long it takes them to do the different types of cards. So for the character cards, cards that are meant specifically to review the characters you learn. There's 2 per character. So there's 1,530 characters that you learn in the course through the intermediate course, which means there are 3,060 cards because there's 2 different cards for each character. And same thing with the vocab cards. There are 600 vocab cards, but there's 2 different cards to review each of them. So there's 1,200 vocab cards. For the character cards and the vocab cards, the average of the different students in the course was 9.6 seconds. So we're just going to round that up to 10 seconds. And you need to have at least 7 or 8 exposures to a new fact before you can consider it memorized. So we're going to say 10 different times of seeing the card. So 10 times of seeing each card times 10 seconds per review. 3,060 plus 1,200, 3,060 character cards plus 1,200 vocab cards times 10 reps times 10 seconds. And then the sentence cards, there are 5,730 sentence cards. The average that we came up with from our different students for sentence cards is 15 seconds. And this makes sense because our sentence cards all have native audio from both male and female. So if you want to listen to them properly, you're going to need a little bit extra time to listen to that audio. So each sentence card is an average of 15 seconds. So we have 3,060 character cards times 10 reps times 10 seconds for each rep, 1,200 vocab cards times 10 reps times 10 seconds for each rep, and then 5,730 sentence cards, 10 reps each times 15 seconds. That brings us a total amount of review time to 21,425 minutes. Now, there are other things that need to be reviewed and some other things that need to be taken into consideration. The stories, you want to review them at least 1 time. Now, the second time through, when you're at 98% comprehension, it probably will only take you about 5 minutes per story to review. So that's 100 stories times 5 minutes, 500 minutes for reviewing the stories. But you also have to take into account output. Now, this is speaking practice. This is a very pure estimate, this one. It's hard to calculate output because everybody's personality plays a bigger role in how likely you are to speak to people. So you can obviously set up time with tutors. You can set up time with language exchange partners on various apps and online services. But you can also find yourself in situations where there are Chinese people around and you can just talk to them. So we estimate that it takes about 250 hours of output, or 15,000 minutes, to activate the language that you're passively learning through the Mandarin Blueprint method. This is the language acquisition process. You cannot start using language that you've never been exposed to before. That's just a basic logic there. You can't say things that you haven't heard the words for and that you haven't acquired passively first. Input must come first, and that's what the Mandarin Blueprint method is best at, is giving you comprehensible input every step of the way. But you need to activate it, so we're saying it's going to be about 250 hours of outputting, either writing or speaking, before you've activated the 4,000 words in the curriculum. Again, this is very much an estimate, but that 15,000 minutes, we're going to add that in as well. So 21,425 minutes of flashcard reviews, 15,000 minutes of practicing speaking and writing, plus 500 minutes of reviewing the stories brings us to 36,925 minutes of reviewing time. So we take the 13,540 minutes of learning time plus 36,925 minutes of reviewing time, which brings us to 50,465 minutes total to get through the Mandarin Blueprint method as an average estimate. Now, that in number of hours, that's 841 hours. 841 hours as our final estimate there for how many hours does it take. First of all, again, compare that to 2,200 hours that the FSI puts forward. But remember that this is an estimate based on a distribution. So on every layer, there's going to be some people who do it faster and some people do it slower. Maybe some people are faster at learning, but they're slower at reviewing. Maybe some people are faster all around or slower all around. But we did a number of one of the students on our course, Petri, he is a risk management analysis, I believe a master's student right now. And he helped us by doing these big distributions where you do a number of random scenarios where people are falling somewhere on either side of the average. And he came up with a very similar number to this. So it is a solid estimate based on the data that we have. However, of course, it's still an estimate. So we're not saying it's absolutely guaranteed to be 841 hours, but it should be around that on average for all the students in the course. So if we take 841 hours and then you consider your daily study time, we can start to understand how long it should take you to get through this. Now, already, without even knowing anything about how long it might take, we're talking about 1,400 less hours approximately than the Foreign Service Institute estimates for how long it would take to learn Mandarin Chinese. So we've improved upon what was the traditional learning methods massively, because the Foreign Service Institute, the FSI, they're basing everything on traditional learning methods, which the entire reason that we made Mandarin Blueprint in the first place is because those estimates are based on terrible learning methods. Traditional learning methods is the whole reason that we made Mandarin Blueprint, because we knew they were awful. We knew they were based on very bad underlying language theory. So already, without even having to look at the final sort of month and year estimates, we're already saving you a huge amount of time. But let's just break it down. So if you spent 1 hour a day, that would obviously be 841 days, which is 2 years and 6 months approximately. Now, if you spend 2 hours a day, you cut that in half, 1 year and 3 months to get to the point where you're at 94% of Chinese by frequency. 3 hours a day, 10 months, less than a year. That's probably the most that anybody can do, but we are going to have the occasional close to full-time student. So if you had 6 hours a day, you could do it in 5 months, less than half a year. And if you spent 8 hours a day, you could do it in 4 months. Now, we know there's not many people who can do this completely full-time, but just consider that it is possible if you just said, okay, I'm going to take 4 months and make my entire goal in life just to become literate and fluent in Chinese. You could do it in 4 months, which is really quite an amazing thing. Just a reminder, again, these are estimates, but they're estimates based on a lot of data and logic, so they're not, as the Chinese would say, 凭空, which would mean to pull it out of nowhere. We've definitely put a lot of thought into these estimates, but nonetheless, always want to have that disclaimer in there.
谢谢你观看我们的这个视频. If you found this video valuable and you'd like us to help you reach fluency and literacy in Mandarin Chinese as fast as possible without all the headache of traditional learning methods, just head to mandarinblueprint.com to learn more. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell below to be notified every time we release a new video. And of course, 保重